Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a legal battle between a homeowner and his HOA. And believe it or not, it all started with a simple driveway extension. So have you ever had a disagreement with your homeowners association? About paint colors or maybe lawn maintenance? Yeah, those disputes are pretty common. But this particular story, wow, it escalated from just a simple question all the way to a formal legal hearing. All right, so let's break this down. First, let's meet the key players in this neighborhood conflict. Okay, so on one side, you've got the petitioner, who is the homeowner, Richard J. Jones. And on the other side, we have the respondent, which is the Desert Oasis of Surprise Master Association, basically his community's HOA. So here's what happened. The whole dispute is about a concrete driveway extension that Mr. Jones put in back in May of 2020. And what was the core problem? Well, he built it first and only asked for permission later. As you can probably guess, that's a pretty clear violation of the community's rules. Now, what's really fascinating here is that this entire case, it all comes down to a single rule. It's about something called a setback. So what's a setback? Well, essentially, the guidelines required a 12-inch gap, just a foot, between any new structure and the property line. And this one little rule, it's going to become the centerpiece of the entire legal battle. So you're probably wondering, how did a simple driveway project blow up so dramatically? Let's walk through the timeline of exactly what happened. This whole thing didn't happen overnight. It unfolded over almost a full year. It all kicks off in April 2020 with Mr. Jones just asking about it. But then, just a month later, he goes ahead and installs the driveway anyway, without any approval. It's not until December that his after-the-fact application gets formally denied. That denial leads to a non-compliance notice in January, and then boom, by February 2021, he's filing an official legal petition against his own HOA. Okay, so now the case is in a formal hearing. Let's dig into the arguments Mr. Jones actually presented to the judge. His main argument, his central claim, was that the HOA was holding him to a standard that just wasn't explicitly written down in the rules back then. He basically said the guidelines were ambiguous, they were unclear, and that the HOA was just being totally unreasonable. And he didn't just say that, he backed it up with some specific points. First, he argued the rule only mentioned a setback from the wall, not the full property line. That's a key distinction. Then, he pointed out that the rules for sidewalks did specifically mention the property line, which kind of suggests driveways were meant to be treated differently. On top of that, he claimed the HOA was only enforcing this rule against him, selective enforcement. And, to top it all off, he said, hey, my immediate neighbors, they had zero objections to the new driveway. Well, as you can imagine, the Homeowners Association saw the whole situation very, very differently, and they came prepared with their own evidence. For the HOA, this was pretty much an open and shut case. They said it was built on two really fundamental violations of the community's rules. One, he didn't get prior approval, and two, he violated that setback rule. Simple as that. So the HOA laid out its evidence really clearly. First, they said, look, prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee, it's mandatory, no exceptions. Second, they argued that the common wall is part of the property line, which means the rule absolutely applies here. They even explained why the rule exists. It's practical stuff, like making sure water drains properly. But here's the real kicker. Their most powerful piece of evidence was an official report, and it showed that other homeowners had been denied for the exact same violation. That pretty much blew his claim of selective enforcement right out of the water. All right, so with both sides having made their case, it was all up to the administrative law judge to weigh the evidence and make the final call. Okay, before we get to the verdict, there's a quick legal thing that's really important to understand here. The burden of proof, it was all on Mr. Jones. He had to prove his case by what's called a preponderance of the evidence. That just means he had to show it was more likely than not that the HOA was the one who violated its own rules. And the judge broke the whole decision down into three really logical steps. Step 1, the violation. Mr. Jones himself admitted his driveway didn't comply with the wall setback rule. That's a big one. Step 2, the interpretation. The judge decided that the HOA's way of reading its own rule was perfectly reasonable. And finally, step 3, the proof. The judge found that Mr. Jones he didn't provide enough evidence to back up his claim of selective enforcement. So in the end, the judge's official order was super clear and direct. Because Mr. Jones had not met his burden of proof, his petition against the HOA was dismissed. Plain and simple. The HOA won. Okay, so the case is over. But what can other homeowners take away from this? I mean, why does this story matter to anyone living in a planned community? This story really offers some crucial takeaways for any homeowner. The biggest one, always, always, always get approval in writing before you start any work. You have to remember, your community guidelines are basically a binding contract. And here's the critical part. Even if a rule seems kind of ambiguous to you, a judge can still side with the HOA if they think the HOA's interpretation is reasonable. Ultimately, this whole case highlights that central tension you find in any planned community. It really pits the goal of protecting everyone's property values with uniform rules against an individual's freedom to use their own property however they want. And the story really makes you ask, right? When it comes to your own home, where do you think that line should be drawn?